All right, welcome back to the Ottawa studios of Inside My Canoe Head. I am your host, Dr. D. Today, we are going to chat about vision and why in this incredibly disruptive, chaotic world that we're living in, we need visionaries. We need somebody who can articulate the possible. So sit back, grab yourself your favorite beverage, my friends. Let's get at it. All right, thanks again for joining us this week in this chaotic world we live in. Welcome to the age of disruption. I'm not sure if it's colloquially being called that or if somebody is going to officially prescribe and annotate it as such. The point being is we're living in a very disruptive time. There's a lot of decisions being made around us that are so far beyond our control. I live here in the province of Ontario in the country of Canada. We just had a subnational provincial, similar to a state, election yesterday. The incumbent government won with the same basic type of majority they had before. Status quo, third majority in the middle. It basically is telling us that absolutely no problem. We love what you're doing. Keep doing it. And the things that you told us about, we think they're great. Now, there's a good portion of the population that would disagree with that. The point being in a democracy is I have a say, but I don't have the final say, which means I did my dutiful responsibility and I voted, right? And people have been arguing a lot online this morning as to whether you have the right to complain. You know what? You have a right to complain. It's called, in Canada, your freedom of expression. In the United States, it's called freedom of speech. The point that the argument makes is with every right that you get, whether it's a constitutional right in the United States of America, or whether it's a right that's enshrined in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is part of our Constitution here in Canada, every single right that you are afforded under law comes with a set of duties, obligations, and responsibilities, the same as the right to the citizenship in your country comes with the same thing. Now, the majority of those things, the duties, responsibilities, and obligations that you have are not codified in law. They're codified in a national moral standard that is culturally enforced. And it simply states in the area of voting that it is your duty and responsibility to find the least worst option of what's presented to you. So there were 7 or 8 candidates in my local riding. It was my responsibility to look them all and make the choice of the best. Even if I didn't like all of them, I had a duty. My argument is I had a duty and responsibility to look at their platforms and make the best selection. Now, something that matters to you is what I tell my children when I was teaching them about their civic responsibility is sometimes the bigger picture is hard to understand. You know, which one of the candidates for premier do you want to lead the province? I said, sometimes as a member of a democracy, you're going to find a personal issue that matters to you, which may be defense spending nationally. It may be healthcare and education spending provincially. It may be something particular. And I'll take this from my sister, a brilliant lady who lives in London, Ontario. And we had this discussion when I was down. We were all down visiting my ailing mother. And she basically said that she has an issue that to her she believes is important. To others would see it as inconsequential and not of concern. But to her it mattered. She chose her issue. She called all of the major parties and the representative offices within her riding, and she posed the question, what do they intend to do about it? The cause is irrelevant at this point. It doesn't matter. It means that she stood for something. She called, she got the information, and she cast her ballot based upon the issue that mattered to her. Whether you look at it specifically or more broadly, you have a duty and obligation. And that's kind of where that argument is. I just wanted to throw my thoughts out there. Again, what we do here at Inside My Canoe Head is drop over to our website, www.insidemycanoehead.ca. It'll take you to the website. There's a bunch of cool stuff on there you can check out. And down the bottom is a connection directly to my email at jeff@preparednesslabs.ca. That is the parent company to Inside My Canoe Head. It is one of Canada's leading educational firms in emergency preparedness and risk management identification and strategic outcomes. The point here is that you can contact me directly with your thoughts on the podcast, whether you like the ideas that I present, whether something in this podcast irks you and you want to comment on it, good, bad, or indifferent. I get them all, and I actually answer them all personally. So I believe that you as a listener to my podcast who are giving up your most important asset, which is time, the least I can do is give you an avenue to talk to me directly and tell me what you think. I appreciate it. We're closing in on 30,000 downloads. We have 330 plus episodes. We're downloaded in 71 nations across the country or across the globe. We're having an impact on the conversation about preparedness. And lately in the last 2 seasons, we've been kind of slightly moving that into bigger, broader issues, which today I really want to talk about the day after a provincial election. And as we sit here in Canada and we're on the verge of probably looking down the barrel of a federal election at some time in the not too distant future, there's a lot of pontification out there as to when that may be. Fair enough. But the point is that we lack vision. We used to have broad, brilliant visionaries within the political system, and even the ones that I do not agree with, that hold values and view government's role in society differently than I do. There are a number of them that I have a great deal of respect for because they had visions. They were able to compartmentalize all of their ideas, to be able to present it in a persuasive manner, and to get people motivated, to get people to gather behind. Because, for example, and today's discussion is going to be about the discipline of academia and emergency management, but you can kind of juxtapose everything we're going to talk about today to your professional frame. So whether you're an entrepreneur, you're an electrician, you're a retired teacher, you're a speech pathologist, whatever it may be, think about the opportunities that come up periodically within your professional frame where you are influenced by things beyond your control and change is forced upon you. Often this is time when visionaries emerge and they seize on the opportunities that are presented by disruption to provide new methodological ideas as to how we tackle today's societal problems. And we used to have them. The Tommy Douglases in Canada, which was notably the father of modern day public health care in Canada, even though I'm quite certain he would be rolling over in his grave as to what it has turned into. But the idea behind that we collectively fund a system that provides healthcare then without a credit card access to everybody needs it, and that healthcare access can only ever be based upon need, and that no matter how much money you have, you cannot purchase your way to the front of the line, right? That was the idea in general behind the Canadian system. And we didn't have a system at the time. Remember, these are bold ideas that come out. We've had bold political ideas when I'll just give credit to when the first Trudeau Prime Minister brought the Constitution home, the British North America Act, which was enacted in the UK legislature and the Canadian legislature in 1867 that formed this incredible country called Canada, amended many times since then. But it was a British North America Act that vested a lot of powers in the UK. Now, yes, a lot of them changed. The Westminster Act and a bunch of other things happened in Canadian history. But in 1982, we brought the Constitution back to Canada. So basically making the king retained as our head of state, but in figurehead only with really no power. And we created a national Charter of Rights and Freedoms, of which have gone through hundreds and hundreds of constitutional tests within our courts to determine what that actually means. And basically, good, bad, or indifferent, we have a constitutional document and a Charter of Rights of Individuals. That was because somebody had a bold vision to bring it in. Pierre Trudeau and the people around him had a bold vision. Now, I know a lot of people in Canada right now with the name Trudeau want to be violently ill. The point being is that at times we've had quite a number of people in this country who have done some pretty remarkable things at the governance level. My argument is they've existed the same in the departments and agencies and disciplines and fields. And I'll give you an idea of, I've spent the last week when I'm doing research for this episode, trying to read many of the historical commentaries about times in the past. So what did the world look like in the mid 1930s? What some letters that were written and some articles that were written in the newspaper post the U.S. Civil War? Like, how do we, in these disruptive times when we seem so disconnected and opposed, or we have some type of an authoritarian government making systemic radical changes, what do we do as a discipline? For example, when somebody brought in, the acts that governed the version of how doctors operate or how lawyers operate. These are all professions that are regulated by law, and it's one of the requirements to be a profession is you have to have a legislative act that defines it, puts the limitations on it, assigns the authority for admittance, ethics, removal, loss of certification, all that stuff, right? Every time that we had a bold vision and brought that forward, that discipline went through some pretty significant fights and iterations. It's really interesting. And there's some archives, not a lot, but there's some really good archives if you dig for them. And I'm an academic nerd. I do this periodically. If you dig through the archives that are sitting in the province of Ontario about the time when socialized medicine was being brought in and what the field of what the doctors wanted to do, it was not unanimity, right? It was absolutely not. There was a lot of disruptive discussions about that. And so what somebody was able to do was to rally together a cause and demonstrate what the future could look like, how it would be different than what we did today. And I try as best as I can, and though I slip up periodically, as we all do, I try to say opportunities like this are looking for a different outcome. I hate to say a better outcome, because better is very subjective, right? There are some people that think the system pre-Donald Trump in the United States of America was working just fine, and it didn't need this level of disruption. There's a lot of people who might disagree with that, right? Both of them were opinions, and they were well held by the individuals that owned them. And it's very subjective to say Donald Trump's United States of America in a year from now will be better than the one he got from Biden. That's subjective because it depends what you hold to be a truism, what you morally and ethically believe, and what you believe the role of government is, right? If you believe in incredibly small government, you're more of a libertarian stance. You will see a lot of this disruption, and mass firing is a very good thing. Yes, very disruptive, very painful, throwing everything out and destroying kicking down the walls. But you will still see it as a net benefit in the end. If you don't see that vision for the government, and if you see something different, then you're going to look at the outcomes that are occurring right now as unnecessary, disruptive, and damaging a perfectly fine, workable system. Yes, it had problems. It probably needed to be amended and addressed, whatever, but we didn't need to destroy the whole thing top to bottom, left to right. It's subjective, which is I use the word a different outcome. And I wrote a piece in Substack this morning over at Jeff Donaldson, and it'll be up on LinkedIn shortly. And as well, I'll have a YouTube video up about it. The point here is what we're trying to make is when an external force comes into your discipline in your world and they make systemic changes to the way the funding model and the legislative framework and the structure of your field and your profession, the point here is that we have the opportunity to do something brilliant with that, right? And I say this in academia because right now in Canada, and I'm basically live in two fields. One is emergency management and one is academia. I teach at the graduate level in emergency management. Fair enough. Professor doing all that, having a great time. Really enjoy it. Shout out to my current students doing their capstone project and the master's program. But in academia, we see with the changes the government of Canada made as a policy response to a lot of political upheaval and popular opinion, is they dramatically reduced the number of international students that would be allowed into Canada at the universities. The universities had made a funding model construction decision to position their universities in a place where they desperately required the money that came from international students who likely pay 2 to 3 times as much as a domestic student, right? So the universities intentionally built this model where they require day-to-day operations, the funding from international students. And then when the international students were cut dramatically and significantly, and they may be getting close to zero in some parts of the country sooner rather than later, the universities are now in trouble because they built this model that requires this funding. Now what they're doing is they're calling for somebody to replace the funding. But what they're not calling for is, hey, this is an incredible opportunity for us to sit down and look at how we've constructed this. We placed ourselves at risk by requiring the funding from this level of international students, and therefore we have got to figure out how do we continue to deliver a rock-solid product, independent as academia should be, from ideologically and cultural influence, which is a whole nother podcast, because I think we might actually be losing that fight where ideology and cultural different things are taking over and taking away the academic freedoms that were designed to keep them independent from these type of pressures. But we don't see that. We don't see the visionaries in academia coming out and saying, you know what, this has thrown us into tatters and shivers, and this is creating disruption, but this is the perfect time for us to be innovative. Let's sit down and figure out how do we continue to deliver incredible product, deliver it differently, deliver it in a different outcome, but we do so even though now our structural financial framework has changed, right? Because all you ever hear is the pontifications about cuts and losses and apocalyptic or cataclysmic outcomes that you always see all over the internet. You know, academia is going to fail, universities are going to close, research is going to stop. What you don't hear is somebody in the middle saying, our funding has been structurally reduced by 20%. As a result, this is incredible opportunity for us to envision a new, bold future. You don't hear that. All you hear is status quo. Now, I read a piece in the Substack this morning about the fact that humans are very much risk adverse. We don't like change. We like the status quo. Uncertainty is uncomfortable. So every time we are forced in a position where we have to make rapid changes to what we do, we don't like it. And our immediate reaction always is to call it dumb and ignorant. And of course, you know, academia will come up with some big, broad words and make all kinds of accusations about future outcomes they have no control over or no way of forecasting either. That being said, we can say the same thing about the discipline of emergency management, the other one that I study in. And when you think about that in the United States of America, they've had a certain system. FEMA was brought in 1979. It was created in 1979 from a bunch of different agencies in the United States of America by President Jimmy Carter. And that was brought in for a very certain group of reasons that existed at the time. And I'm not in a position to argue. I'm not an expert in American history, right? So, or American public policy analysis. So I'm not in a position to say it was a good or a bad decision. I'm saying it has gone through a series of different roles and responsibilities have changed and expanded, and disasters are becoming far more expensive. No, they're not becoming more frequent. I'm sorry to tell you that. The data doesn't support that. But they are becoming far more expensive because we keep building expensive things in precarious locations. And the cost of goods sold, to use a business terminology, goes up. So when we build a building and then a flood takes it out 10 years later, it's now going to cost us 3 times more to rebuild it than it did to originally build it. And this is why disasters are exponentially growing. Plus, we've decided that we would like higher density housing. We want people condensed into a small area with all the goods and services together. And because of that, that means we have a very expensive to replace system. Now, it works brilliantly and people love it. I'm not arguing with it. I'm just saying that the decisions humanity has made has put us in a position where disasters are becoming far more expensive. And FEMA's principal role that it has taken over is just that, is providing the American version of Canada's DFAA, the Disaster Funding Assistance, that comes from the federal government down to the provinces to assist with costs that exceed their ability to pay and to support in times of major events that occur. And FEMA does the same thing across the United States. They have a number of different policies based upon the Stafford Act and other amendments and regulatory frameworks that have been brought in after. Again, I'm not here to analyze it, but what I'm saying is The wrecking ball came for FEMA in the last month. The wrecking ball's come for a lot in the United States, but it's come for FEMA, and it's talking about firing a number of people. There was just a bunch of recent firings at the NOAA, which is the National Observatory of Atmospheric Administration. It's basically the weather service for the world. Some of the most brilliant meteorological minds work there, and a number of staffers have been fired. Staffers are being fired all over the U.S. government for a whole bunch of different reasons. Again, I'm not the expert on American politics. I'm not here to comment whether it's good or bad. I'm here to state that we watch on TV it's happening. What I don't see coming out of the discipline is the phoenix in the ashes, for lack of a better term. We don't have an innovative voice. We don't have a leader voice. We don't have a visionary voice in the discipline who's coming out and saying, it looks like we're going to have a significant reduction in funding from the federal level and in the field of emergency management in the United States of America. This gives us a brilliant opportunity to sit back and see what is possible. What can future ways of doing it? Again, it's not about doing things better than we used to or worse, because that's a subjective analysis. It's about doing things different. How might we, knowing that we now live in a different world, we live in a world powered by a whole bunch of new technologies, how might we consider options for delivering services to people, knowing that our resources have been cut and will likely be cut more? What might that look like? And it's not about rolling out an implementation project right now. What I'm calling for is the visionary thought leaders to come out and start putting ideas out in the public space. Let's talk about what is possible. I'm not in a position to reconstruct or deconstruct anything, but I am in a position to say, I don't see it in academia, but I see a crap ton of complaining online. I don't see it in emergency management, but I see a crap ton of complaining online. And I know it's early days. It's only the first couple of weeks of disruptions. And in public policy work, a couple of weeks is a blink of an eye. I get that. I completely understand that frame. The point that we're having is that right now, we're only talking about apocalyptic and cataclysmic outcomes that are possible from government massively changing how it's doing business. You've got to understand we exist in both in the U.S. Republic system and in the Canadian parliamentary democracy system, is that we have groups of people that believe that these type of things are proper and that the role for government is different. So what we got to agree upon is what is the deliverable for emergency management in Canada? What is the deliverable for emergency management in the United States? Knowing that resources are diminishing. And the challenge is always going to be to the people who execute and the wonderful practitioners that are out there, and many of them I call my friends, and I have the greatest respect for them. The challenge that we have with them is anybody in a profession that I've come across in my life, and I'm 54 years old, and I was in the profession of arms for 28 years. They always want to do more than they're legislatively required to do. Always want to do more than their mandate requires. Always want to help more. Always want to be more. Always want to ameliorate more suffering. And I understand the rationale and the support for that. The problem is that's not what you're funded to do. That's not what you're being asked to do. I know people want to do so much more. The logic when you're in a profession, especially and only when you're in a publicly funded profession, is that you do what you're being asked to do to the extent possible within your framework, your resource framework, be it people, responsibility, legislative, technology, financial, whatever that may be, and then you stop. This is it. This is what we're able to do. So, for example, if I said the Public Safety Canada emergency management budget used to be $100 million. It's now going to be $60 million. We're not necessarily going to have worse outcomes. We're not necessarily going to have better outcomes. How do we deliver the best possible service we can to Canadians within a $60 million framework and still reach the intent of emergency management on behalf of the citizens? The vision comes from the courses of action, critical path if you're a project management professional. How do we get there? There are going to be many different ways, many different avenues to get from the current status quo, the current situation where we're sitting at right now, to where it is that we want to be. We want to be somewhere that's within the framework. And this is part of the problem we have when we get a lot of publications within the emergency management space, is they talk about all the wonderful things they could do and they just need more funding. That's the problem. If I give you a $60 million funding, you can't sit there and complain that you don't have the funding to execute a $100 million program. You're being allocated $60 million. You build the best possible program for $60 million. The brilliance of that is when you remove all of the regulatory framework, you remove all of the policy hooks, and you say, we'll rewrite the legislation to fit what you come up with that fits within the $60 million envelope that we have the ability to offer in this discipline and in this field. I know there is some incredible ideas out there. And I've talked about this in my past, and I'll throw it out in the podcast as well. I've done an exercise that I call the 150 challenge, or some name to that. I've used a couple of different ones in the past. And you can do it a 50 challenge at a lower. The point is what we do is we look at a region of Canada or a region of the United States, and then we say, okay, there's a responsibility here to deliver an emergency management system. I'm going to get rid of every policy, every legislation, and every regulatory framework that exists. I'm going to give you the outcome you have to deliver. I'm going to give you the restricted budget that is likely to be in place. And then I'm going to give you a number of people. I call it the 150 challenge because then I say, I can give you 150 full-time equivalents, which is a human being, full-time and all their benefits. Design me the program. And when I give that to graduate students in the emergency management program, I rarely get something that looks anything like the system we have today. And it's notable because 65% of my students to date have work at least part-time, if not full-time, in the emergency management discipline directly. So because of that, I have people doing the discipline who look at that opportunity, and when they have to design it from scratch, which in a limited budget and a limited number of humans, they don't roll out a system that looks anything like we have. Yet we have no visionary opportunity to fuel that kind of thinking. Everything that we do to this point in public policy, especially in Canada, we're very, very conservative. And Jen Gerson and Matt Gurney talked about this on one of their recent Line podcasts. If you're ever looking for the best podcast in Canada when it comes to news and current affairs within this country, it's readtheline.ca. Absolutely brilliant. And they brought it up is that Canadians are very much conservative and our Americans are very much less liberal, not in a political sense, but in we don't like change and we don't change very quickly. We love incrementalism. If you look at the history of Canadian politics, even in momentous events and occasions in our past, we have made incremental changes. We're not very good, or we're not very comfortable, I should say, in making broad, systemic, rapid changes to anything, anywhere, in any field in this country. We like at the margins. We would make a neoclassical economics professor smile at the rate of change is so slow in Canada because we're so risk adverse as a population. In the United States of America, they're like, we'll throw the baby out with the bathwater tomorrow. If you got a new system, let's go. They're liberal. They think that way. We don't. And because of that, we don't make the broad changes. So when we're looking at these type of opportunities that I give my students, the feedback it gives me is that within specifically the discipline of emergency management, there is a host of people at very senior or medium level who know that how they're doing it right now doesn't make any sense. And there is there's a much different way that we can employ the emergency management people now that would create a different outcome with a lot less resources. But that's not socialized. The idea of turning it upside down for the sake of coming up with something new that's different in a broader framework is not something we support. especially when we have a disruption like now. Whenever we have budgetary disruptions in Canada, what we traditionally do is we have a habit of hunkering down, bunkering down, battening the hatches, as we say in the East Coast when a nor'easter coming in. We basically say we have to protect what we have and lose as little as we can. We don't think innovative, right? Canadians are very defensive. So when you come to the Department of National Defense and you attempt to cut the budgets, as many governments have of every political stripe you could imagine, the response is obviously immediately to do something crazy like we're going to cancel the snowbirds or something ridiculous like that. And I remember famously Johnny Chrétien calling out the Canadian Armed Forces when he was going through a budgetary restrictive period. And he did that, and his finance minister, they laughed at it when the military said they're going to ground the snowbirds. They said, no, you're not going to do that, and basically embarrassed the military, and they looked ridiculous on the public stage by saying something like that. But the point is, like, what did they do? I mean, the federal government, when they balanced their budget magically with the Liberals in the Johnny Chrétien days, they recovered from way overspending from the Conservative government before them. They were given accolades for it. In reality, all they did is they just cut the funding to the provinces and downloaded the problem. They didn't make any systemic changes. They just cut what the provinces or downloaded responsibilities to them. The problem is that nobody was innovative. Nobody was thinking about new ways. Nobody was thinking about different ways of tackling similar problems and agreeing that maybe a different set of outcomes is necessary, a different set of outcomes that faces reality. Remember, we've got a set of outcomes in emergency management that largely haven't changed in 30 years. The world around us is rapidly different. Technology is incredibly different, but we haven't sat back and said, maybe we need to craft a different set of outcomes. When you craft a different set of outcomes, you now open up the critical paths and the courses of action ideologies to go after the multiple streams and the multiple methods of delivering that new set of outcomes through innovation and disruption. And what you get when you allow people to publicly think and you bring the great minds together is you get far better outcomes. My argument right now, and the whole purpose of today's podcast, and I hope you enjoyed what you were listening to today, is simply that we don't have a visionary anywhere in this country. We don't have them at the national level, and we don't have visionaries in the professions and in the discipline. So every time somebody takes a hit because of something, it's just a catastrophic, cataclysmic, don't you know the horrible things that are going to happen if you dare do this? Or once you do it, you're on the hook and you're responsible. And all of this wonderful banter that sounds great to a bunch of high school kids, or I should say elementary kids around recess, but I think we're bigger than that. So my offering for you today is to just consider, hey, if I was to say to you that you're within whatever professional field you're in, and somebody came along and cut your budget by a fifth, a third, or even a half, you obviously couldn't keep doing things the same way you were doing before. You would have to come up with innovation and new. Are you the type of person who would take that opportunity and say, let's jump at this, let's figure out the next iteration, because it can't be the old one. So what does the next iteration look like, and how we can do the best we can with this reduced resource framework? Or would you be the one that would spend most of your professional time on LinkedIn and other sources bemoaning the future losses and death and destruction that is going to come? You have a choice to be either one of those. As the old saying goes, choose wisely. So thanks for joining us this week in Inside My Canoe Head. It has been an absolute pleasure to be the voice of this podcast. We are coming up in about 2 months. We are going to hit the 5th year anniversary of this podcast. We've got some great celebrations planned. I hope you can join us as we get closer to that. We will announce certain things that occur. I am ever grateful to those who listen to this podcast, who share it with their friends, who comment back to me. This is part of my trifecta of free preparedness information. We write on Substack, we produce this podcast, and then we make a YouTube video about the same. It gives you the opportunity whether you want to look at it in the video format, the audio format, or the written format. We are here to serve Canadians and the greater global community, to bring in a culture of preparedness, to get people to accept personal responsibility for their outcomes, and to figure out a way, instead of just complaining about the world they live in, figure a way to thrive in the middle of all of this chaos. So thank you very much. Take care. Stay safe.